Everyone in Pine Hollow said the dog was just a dog until they saw the blood on Malia's shirt. And by then, it was far too late to take it back. Malia Jenkins was 9 years old when the bullet tore through the soft fur of her beagle mix, Jasper. One second, he was chasing dragonflies near Mr. Halvorson's white picket fence. The next, he was on the ground, legs twitching, his brown eyes wide with shock. No one screamed, not even Malia. The silence hit first, like thunder without sound. And then the burning started inside her chest, in her eyes, in her fists balled so tight her fingernails left tiny crescent moons on her palms. She dropped to her knees in the dirt, not caring that her jeans would stain. Jasper's chest heaved once, twice. He was still alive. That mattered. That meant she had a chance. She slipped her arms underneath his warm, shaking body and lifted. He whimpered. She bit her lip so hard it split. "Don't you die on me," she whispered. The street was lined with the same porches, the same rocking chairs, the same Confederate flags flapping lazily in the Texas wind. No one came to help. Doors shut with a quiet finality as she passed, carrying a bleeding dog whose fur dripped red down her arms. Some watched through slits in curtains. Some pretended they didn't see. Malia didn't look back. 5 miles. That's how far the nearest vet was. 5 miles of cracked sidewalks and blistering pavement. She was barefoot. She hadn't even realized. Her shoes were still on the porch back at home, where Mama told her to be back by noon. It was 11:08 when the gun went off. The heat scorched her soles. Jasper whimpered again, softer this time. She adjusted his weight, cradling him like her baby cousin. Her arms ached by mile 2. She didn't stop. At mile 3, she passed Sheriff Dean's cruiser parked under the shade of the church. He saw her, looked her dead in the eyes, and then turned his face back to his newspaper. The rustle of pages was louder than any siren. At mile 4, her legs gave out. Just for a second, she fell to her knees, Jasper nearly slipping from her grasp. He yelped. That single sound, that cry of pain, put steel in her spine. She stood back up. She made it to the vet at 12:02. 2 minutes past Mama's warning. She didn't care. Dr. Patel met her at the door. One look, and he didn't ask questions. He took Jasper from her, his hands gentle, eyes wide. Blood smeared his scrubs. Malia stood outside the room as the door swung shut behind them. Her arms were empty. Her chest wasn't. That night, Malia slept in a chair in the waiting room. Jasper had surgery. He lived. The bullet had missed his heart by a whisper. Dr. Patel said it was a miracle. Malia said it was Jasper being stubborn, like always. But the miracle wasn't what the town remembered. The miracle wasn't what made the front page. It was the fact that the bullet didn't come from a hunter's rifle or a stray accident. It came from Mr. Halvorson's porch, from a 12-gauge, fired on purpose, and it wasn't meant for the dog. 2 days later, the sheriff came to Malia's house, not to apologize, not to ask what she saw, but to warn. Sometimes dogs get shot when they wander too far, he said, sipping coffee from a mug that said proud to protect. Best keep him on a leash. Malia didn't say a word, just stared at the man. His eyes didn't blink. Her mother stood behind her, hand on Malia's shoulder, shaking ever so slightly. That night, Malia wrote everything down in her notebook. Every porch, every look, every locked door. She drew Jasper's bleeding body and traced the path she walked. She wrote what she heard Mr. Halvorson say before he pulled the trigger. Damn mutt. Should have shot the girl instead. The notebook didn't stay a secret. A teacher found it 2 weeks later when Malia left it behind by accident on her desk. That teacher, Miss Coleman, was new to Pine Hollow. She wasn't from around there, and that made all the difference. Miss Coleman read it, and then she made copies. Dozens of them. The truth spread like fire in dry grass. Malia was called to the principal's office. Not to be punished, but to be questioned, to be understood, to be believed. When a story hit the local paper, there was outrage. Not from everyone. Some still said she made it up, but others quiet, uncomfortable. Others started to shift in their seats. Why hadn't anyone helped her? Why did the sheriff ignore her? Why had Mr. Halvorson not been arrested? The town held a meeting at the church. The pews were full. Malia stood up front, holding Jasper in her arms, the scar from the bullets still pink under his fur. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just told the truth. Every porch, every locked door, every moment of silence. No one interrupted. No one dared. When she finished, there was no applause. Just a long, suffocating quiet. And for the first time in Pine Hollow, that silence meant something. They heard her. They couldn't unhear her. The silence didn't last forever. It never does. But what came next wasn't noisy, it was something more dangerous. It was whispers, behind closed doors, between pews, at grocery aisles where people used to pretend they didn't see Malia and her mother. Now they saw her. They just didn't know what to say. Some offered tight smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Others crossed the street altogether. But the ones who talked the most, whispered the loudest, were the ones who were afraid. Not of Malia, not of the truth, but of what it meant for them. Because if she was right, then they had been wrong. For a long, long time. 3 days after the town meeting, Mr. Halvorson packed up his truck. No warning. No for sale sign. Just gone. His porch was empty, his curtains pulled, the Confederate flag no longer waving in the wind. People said he left for Amarillo. Some said he went farther. Sheriff Dean said nothing at all. But he watched Malia more closely now. She noticed. She wasn't dumb. She saw his cruiser slow down every time she rode her bike to the corner store. She saw his eyes narrow when she walked Jasper on the leash they could barely afford. Once, he followed her and her mother home from church. Didn't turn on his lights. Didn't stop. Just drove slowly behind them until they reached the porch. Then he parked outside for 10 minutes, pretending to check paperwork. Mama called it intimidation. Malia called it fear. Jasper called it with a growl every time he saw that white cruiser roll by. But Malia didn't scare easy. Not anymore. She started walking taller. Started sitting in the front row of class. Started raising her hand even when she didn't know the answer. And her notebook? She didn't hide it anymore. She brought it everywhere. Kids asked questions. She answered them. That's how the ripple began. Micah Daniels, the quiet boy with the stutter, sat next to her at lunch one day. Didn't say much, just nodded and opened his sandwich. He'd never sat with her before. The next day, it was Layla Brooks. Then Junior. Then half the 5th grade. Malia's table wasn't a table, Anna Maria. It was a movement. They didn't say that out loud. They didn't need to. But one day, when a girl named Emma asked, "Do you think it would have been different if you were white?" Malia didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said. No one argued. How could they? It was only 2 weeks later when Miss Coleman started something that changed everything. She gave them an assignment. Write about a time you felt invisible. Some kids wrote about losing soccer games. Others wrote about being ignored at home. But just a few wrote about bigger things. Like the time Micah saw his dad get pulled over for looking suspicious on his way home from work. Or when Layla's grandma had to bring 3 pieces of mail and a driver's license to get a library card, even though the white woman before her didn't show anything at all. They wrote in pencil. They wrote in ink. They wrote in anger and sorrow, and with voices they didn't know they had. Miss Coleman made a wall out of their stories. She called it the invisible truth. It stretched the length of the hallway by the cafeteria. Some parents complained, said it was too political, said it was divisive. But the principal said it was brave. And Malia? She smiled for the first time in weeks. That smile didn't last long, because one morning the wall was gone. Gone. Every single page, every handwritten truth, every drawing and headline and heartbreak ripped down. No note, no warning, just an empty hallway and the smell of bleach. Malia found Miss Coleman in the teacher's lounge, crying into a coffee mug. She didn't say who ordered it. Didn't have to. Malia already knew. That afternoon, Malia walked straight into the front office and asked to use the phone. She called the local news. "My name is Malia Jenkins," she said. "I have a story about how our town erased the truth again." The reporter showed up the next morning. Her name was Samira Clay, and she wasn't from Pine Hollow either. She brought a camera, a microphone, and questions that didn't stop at, "How do you feel?" She asked about the sheriff, about Mr. Halvorson, about the wall, about the fear. Malia answered everything. So did Miss Coleman. So did Micah and Layla, and even a janitor who said off the record, "We've been painting over the truth in this town for 50 years. The story aired on the 6 o'clock news. It ran again at 10. By morning, it had been shared thousands of times. People outside Pine Hollow started asking questions. Reporters called the school. Civil rights lawyers started looking into past cases. A retired vet sent Malia a new collar for Jasper with a note that said, "Heroes wear fur too." That's when Sheriff Dean showed up again. But this time, he wasn't alone. He brought Child Protective Services. He brought a warrant. They said they were investigating Malia's home for neglect and emotional manipulation. Said her mother was using her daughter to stir unrest. They searched the house, took pictures, asked invasive questions, left with nothing, except one thing. Jasper. They took him under the pretense of safety, check said. They needed to make sure he was in a stable environment. Malia cried for the first time since the bullet. And then she got angry. She went back to her notebook. This time, she didn't just write. She planned. She organized, and with Miss Coleman's help, she launched something Pine Hollow had never seen, a protest led by children. It started with 20 kids, then 50, then 100. They marched through downtown with signs that read, "Truth isn't illegal," and "Justice for Jasper." They chanted, they sang, they blocked the front steps of the courthouse. The sheriff tried to break it up. He failed. Because the cameras were already rolling, because the whole world was watching now, and because no one silences a girl who carried her shot dog 5 miles and turned grief into fire. The sheriff stood at the edge of the courthouse steps, arms folded across his chest, mouth tight like he was chewing on nails. His badge glinted in the sunlight, but no one was paying attention to it anymore. The power it once held had withered. The crowd was too loud, too angry, too alive. Malia stood on the top step, holding a poster she made herself, a drawing of Jasper with his bandaged chest, one eye squinting like he was smiling. Across the top, she had written in thick red marker, "He survived the bullet. Now bring him home." Next to her, Miss Coleman spoke into a megaphone. Her voice was steady but electric. "We are not here to disrespect. We are not here to destroy. We are here because truth matters." And this little girl, she pointed to Malia, told it when no one else would. The crowd roared in support. Reporters lined the sidewalk. Microphones, cameras, notepads. The story had become too big for Pine Hollow to contain. CNN, MSNBC, even The Guardian had a correspondent in the crowd. Hashtags flooded Twitter. "Justice for Jasper, stand with Malia, truth in Pine Hollow." Some people in town still didn't agree. They watched from behind their blinds. They grumbled at diners. But even they knew the tide was shifting. You could feel it in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks the heat. Inside the courthouse, Judge Merrill peered out through a third-story window. He was an old man, with a reputation for silence and keeping the peace. But even he couldn't deny what was happening. A girl with no voice had found 1,000. An emergency town council meeting was called that afternoon. It was supposed to be closed to the public, but Malia's presence changed that. She walked into the chamber in her Sunday dress, still a bit wrinkled from being shoved into the bottom drawer. Her mother walked beside her, head held high despite the dark circles under her eyes. The room fell quiet when they entered. Reporters weren't allowed inside, but their cameras were pressed against the windows. Mayor Danvers, a heavy-set man with slicked back, gray hair, cleared his throat. "Miss Jenkins, we understand there have been a number of events recently. Misinformation, misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Malia said, her voice slicing through the silence. "Mr. Halvorson aimed at me. He shot Jasper, and then everyone acted like it didn't happen." Councilwoman Ruiz nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "And now your dog's been taken, by order of the sheriff's department, for safety reasons. But Jasper's never hurt anyone. He's the only reason I'm still standing here." A beat passed, then two. Then Mayor Danvers spoke again. "We are reviewing the actions of Sheriff Dean. We have been contacted by the state. There will be an external investigation." Malia didn't flinch. "That's not enough." Murmurs rippled through the room. Her mother squeezed her hand. "What would you suggest?" Councilman Abbott asked, half smirking like a man expecting a child to fold. "I want Jasper back. I want Sheriff Dean suspended. I want cameras on every officer. And I want this town to stop pretending it isn't what it is." Silence. Then a cough. Then Councilwoman Ruiz leaned forward. "You said once in your interview that the silence was worse than the bullet. What?" Malia looked around the room. At the walls where portraits of white men lined the wood-paneled history of Pine Hollow. At the seal of the county above the mayor's head. "Because silence protects the shooter. But the scream? The scream changes things." That quote made headlines the next morning. By 10 a.m., Pine Hollow Sheriff Department issued a statement saying Jasper was cleared for release. An officer not, Dean returned him to Malia's porch that afternoon. He jumped from a cruiser before they could even open the door fully, ears flapping, tail thumping, a high-pitched bark caught between joy and desperation. Malia fell to her knees, sobbing as Jasper tackled her with kisses. The cameras were rolling then, too. But not everything ended in celebration. That same night, a brick was thrown through Miss Coleman's windshield. No note, just glass. 2 days later, Malia's family received an anonymous letter in their mailbox. No return address. Just 2 words printed in all caps. Enough already. The fear returned like a shadow, like mold creeping up from corners you thought you'd cleaned. Malia's mother wanted to leave. "I don't know if it's worth it anymore," she said one night, while folding laundry with trembling hands. "Maybe we go somewhere new, somewhere they don't know your name." But Malia shook her head. "They need to know my name," she whispered. And so she stayed. She kept going to school, kept writing, kept speaking. She got invited to a youth justice summit in Dallas. She met other kids who had fought different battles: poverty, police violence, deportation. And she realized something. Pine Hollow was small, but it wasn't unique. In every state, there were girls like her, carrying more than they should, holding on to truth with bloodied fingers, turning pain into power. By spring, a lawsuit was filed against Sheriff Dean. By summer, he resigned. No one saw it coming. He didn't show up to the press conference. No final statements. Just a letter typed in courier font, citing personal reasons. Malia didn't smile when she heard the news. She didn't jump or cheer. She just went home and wrote her notebook. One voice becomes two. Two becomes a storm. And the storm wasn't over. Because a few weeks later, the school board passed a new policy. Every classroom must include curriculum on racial justice, local history, and civil rights past and present. Miss Coleman cried again, this time in front of the whole class. And no one looked away. Malia was invited to speak at the town's 4th of July ceremony. Some people boycotted. Others stood in the back with arms crossed. But most listened. She stepped up to the podium in a red dress her mother made by hand. Jasper sat at her feet, bandana around his neck. She looked out over the crowd, the same porches, the same faces, the same old buildings. And she told the truth again. This time, the silence was followed by applause. And not the polite kind, the thunderous kind, the kind that says, "We see you now." And for the first time in her young life, Malia Jenkins believed it. Time moved on. Summer drifted into fall, and the town of Pine Hollow began to wear change like a sweater it didn't quite know how to button. Some people still whispered. Some still muttered under their breath at the grocery store. But others began to meet Malia's eyes. And that small Act One glance, one nod meant more than most of them realized. Jasper healed. The scar on his chest faded to a soft pink, his fur curling around it like a halo. But Malia never forgot where it came from. Neither did he. They walked the same streets together now, but it wasn't the same Pine Hollow. New murals bloomed on brick walls where Confederate flags once waved. One of them showed Malia carrying Jasper at her arms, her feet bare, her brow fierce, and behind her, in the swirling paint of fire and sky, a line of children walking with her. Beneath the mural, painted in bold white letters, they tried to erase her. She wrote herself instead. Miss Coleman's wall was rebuilt this time with school board approval. Bigger, brighter, titled The Voices They Tried, T.O. Silence. Malia's notebook pages were framed at the center, untouched, including the one with the quote she had scribbled during her loneliest moment. The world doesn't change with a scream. It changes when the scream echoes. But even as the town shifted, Malia remained grounded. She still washed dishes after dinner, still did her homework at the kitchen table, still argued with her mother over how much screen time she got. But her world had grown wider, braver, and with it came responsibility. The invitation to Washington arrived in a plain manila envelope. No fancy gold trim, just a letter from a congresswoman named Eleanor Watts, inviting Malia to speak at a national forum on youth activism. Malia's hands trembled as she held the letter. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't even sure what it meant. But Jasper barked once, loud and proud. So she went. They flew her and her mother out, business class. She wore a navy blue blazer, one that didn't quite fit at the shoulders, but made her feel like someone important. The room was enormous. Cameras, lights, rows of people in suits who clapped politely until Malia stood at the podium. Then they leaned forward and listened. She didn't read a speech. She didn't need one. She told her story, not with flair, not with pity, but with fire. "I'm not here because I was brave," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here because I was alone, and I had to be loud enough that anyone would hear me. What happened to me didn't start with a bullet, and it didn't end when they brought Jasper back. It's still happening, to kids in towns like mine, to kids in this room." She paused. "I carried a bleeding dog 5 miles because I believed his life mattered. Now I'm carrying something else. Truth, memory, and I'll keep carrying it until someone else picks it up too." When she finished, the room stood, not out of obligation, out of awe. After the speech, Malia met kids from all over the country. A boy from Oakland who started a petition to stop police searches at his school. A girl from Mississippi who sued her district for banning books by Black authors. They shared stories, strategies, dreams. Malia realized she wasn't alone anymore. The next year, she published her first book. It was called 5 Miles of Silence. It became a bestseller. Not because it was polished or fancy, but because it was raw, because every word on the page still bled truth. Teachers assigned it. Parents banned it. Libraries fought to protect it. The cycle continued. and it couldn't be unbroken. By the time she turned 15, Malia had spoken in 20 states. She launched a nonprofit echo project that trained young kids in small towns to speak out, organize, and document their experiences. Her mother ran the logistics. Miss Coleman joined the board. Jasper became the face of the brand, his picture used in every poster and T-shirt, tail wagging like a flag. But for all the noise, all the momentum, Malia never let go of her beginning. She kept the same battered notebook. She kept visiting Pine Hollow Elementary once a month. And she never stopped walking those 5 miles. Every year on the anniversary of the shooting, Malia would recreate her journey barefoot, like the first time. Sometimes with a crowd, sometimes alone, always with Jasper. She'd start at Mr. Halvorson's old house, now boarded up and overgrown. She never knocked, never cursed it. She just stood still for a moment. Then she walked, past the porches where people once turned away, past the church where no one helped, past the sheriff's office now under new leadership. At mile 4, where her legs had once given out, she'd pause again. And remember, because that's where it changed. Not just for her, but for the town. For everyone. The pain, the courage, the silence, the scream. It all lived there. And so did she. On the 5th anniversary of that day, a plaque was placed at the halfway mark. It read, "In honor of the girl who carried more than a dog. In memory of the silence that almost won. In celebration of the voice that wouldn't die." No one knew who paid for it. But Malia didn't ask. She just ran her fingers over the letters and smiled. Jasper sat at her feet, older now, his fur speckled with gray, but still watching her like he always had, with devotion, with pride. That night, as the sun set over Pine Hollow and the cicadas began their endless song, Malia sat on the porch with her mother and her dog, notebook in hand. "What are you writing?" her mother asked. Malia looked out over the horizon, the same small town that had once tried to forget her. The same town that now held her name on murals, plaques, and hearts. "I'm writing about tomorrow," she said. "Already?" "Yes, because I don't want to wait for the next scream to start listening." Her mother didn't respond, just reached out, pulled her daughter close. And in that silent swarm, safe, there was no fear. Only echo, only memory, only truth. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.